First of all, I want to say this is mine and Tom's story.
Amen.
So just kind of imagine him standing over here. I want to start with a quote from David. I called upon the Lord in my distress, and he heard me from his temple. My cry reached his ears. In June of 2011, our world just turned upside down. Tom had a stroke, very gradual stroke. It was weird. It just sort of came on gradually, and they took a long time, several days, to diagnose it as a stroke. We were at Memorial Hospital for 2 or 3 days, and then we went to Siskin Hospital for inpatient therapy. We were there for 3 weeks. Tom celebrated his 92nd birthday and Father's Day. There were all kinds of cards from friends and relatives and all kinds of folks there to celebrate. He worked really, really hard there to try to get so that he could come home, and he did. The stroke affected his right side, his leg, his arm, his swallowing. He couldn't swallow. He had to have a feeding tube. And when he came home, he could walk a little bit with assistance. He had to be fed through the tube. He couldn't use his right hand. And because Tom was diabetic and had an insulin pump, he had to have his blood sugar tested before each meal. And then you had to work put in his blood sugar and how many carbs he was going to eat. And it calculated how much insulin to give him and gave it to him. Now, since he couldn't use his right hand, somebody had to be there to do that for him. Eventually, he got so that he could have stayed alone some, except he always had to have somebody there at mealtime. After he went home, we were doing outpatient therapy at Siskin, and that lasted about 3 months. And again, he worked very, very hard. He got so that he could talk again, slowly, but he could still tell his stories. And you know, the funny thing was when he first went into the hospital with a stroke, Tom came by to see him, and he was trying to tell him a story. Nobody could understand a word he was saying hardly, but we pretended like we did. But he got so he could talk well enough that you could understand him. It was just slower than it used to be. He got to where he could walk pretty good, but I never trusted him because I was afraid to let him go walking by himself. But he'd walk around in the house, and he'd do his exercises and all of that, and that went on for a long time. But we got to where we could, go out and do things. He got to where he could eat, which was real important to him, because then we could go out to the Dunlap restaurant and have meals, and go other places as well. We also were able to go to movies. We went to Texas to see our daughter, and to Mississippi to see his sister, and to Baltimore to see his son. So we were able to do a pretty normal existence. In July this past year, he fell. Being his independent self, he decided we were ready to go somewhere, and he decided he could go out the front door by himself, and he fell doing it, and broke the C2 vertebra in his neck, which meant he had to wear the collar, and y'all remember the collar he wore, and he was so glad to get rid of that. But it also cracked his pelvis, so we were at Siskin again for about the same amount of time. And he never really got to walking as well after that as he did before that fall. Then, at Christmas, he had a good Christmas. All the family came to see him. He played rook. He talked to everybody. He just had a real good time. And then he just suddenly got, well, we all had that crud that was going around, and we really thought that was what was wrong with him, but apparently it wasn't, because on Thursday, January 1st, he couldn't breathe very well and died quickly at the emergency room. Now, I want to tell you the rest of the story. I am not a born caregiver, as some people are, and I think that's wonderful that you can do that. I couldn't. When Tom and I were talking about getting married, there was 22 years difference in our ages. And we knew there would be some problems because of that. And I told him, you know, if you ever get sick, I cannot take care of you. I am not a nurse. I can't be a nurse. I'll work 24 hours a day if I need to hire somebody to do it, but I'm not going to do it. I can't. Well, you know that you've heard that when you tell your plans to God, he laughs. He certainly has a sense of humor. But when we went home from the hospital, we did a lot of crying the first time. We did a lot of crying and a lot of praying, and we said, you know, we finally decided that it is what it is, and we're going to deal with it. With God's help, we're going to deal with it, and he certainly helped us. There is no way that I could have done this without him. And Tom couldn't have either. Tom was a very independent person he was digging post holes when he got sick. And he was always out doing something. So this was a very difficult 3.5 years for him, as well as for me. But you know, God just does such wonderful things. He gave Tom some wonderful children. One of them came every Saturday without fail and played games with him, went outside and worked with him, or he watched while they did what he told them to do. And let me get out and go shopping and do those kinds of things that you really need some time for, and you really need some time to yourself. I don't care how much you love whoever you're taking care of, you got to have some time for yourself. And God arranged that. He arranged for total strangers to offer to help when we were out, and Tom always cried. He arranged for wonderful friends and a wonderful church family to support us, to give him a warm handshake, to give us a hug, and that's so important. God was also there when Tom died. Tom would have been so miserable in a nursing home or in ICU, which they were getting him ready to take him to ICU. And we, you know, with his age and his health problems, there's no telling how long he would have had to have been there. So we could see God's hand in taking him when he did. But I just want to say that it was not me who was the caregiver. It was God. And I want to finish with Psalms 121. It says, "In my troubles, I pled with God to help me, and he did."